The 7 of discs is called Failure, and in some ways this could be a companion to the card we had before, which was all about success. This shows what would happen if, literally, the glass of which was once full is turned upside down. On the Rider-Waite card we can see an agricultural character on the land, of whom is looking at the fruits of his labours, of which are full of all sorts of quite wonderful abundance, and yet he seems fed up with them. He looks almost like he can't be bothered continuing to till the land and to actually grow these things. And why would he feel that way when he's figured out how to make things manifest, and yet he decides that he can't be bothered anymore? Well, that's what this card is all about. On the Tree of Life, it's lczac in the world of Isaiah. And lczac is concerned with endurance, and yet it also has a great sense of chaos surrounding it, and it's not a random chaos, but one of which degenerates from what comes before it. And so previously we were in Tifereth, and that's that wonderful state of harmony, and everything was extremely well balanced. And as we leave Tifereth and come down into lczac, the things around us and the way we feel about them, because we're also concerned with the emotion here, changes form, and so it looks different. And so what we see in lczac here on the 7 is a distorted and twisted version of the energy that we saw on the previous card, which was success. And so obviously here we have failure. This card is actually very dark in colour. It's quite black, there's not much actual sunlight or anything like that coming from it, and so it really does show the night as opposed to the day like we had before. Astrologically, it's Saturn in Taurus, and this symbol we see actually all over the card. The actual discs on here all contain within them symbols of Saturn and Taurus, just repeated over and over again. And so Saturn, of course, is concerned with time and limitation, the awareness that things will die and decay, like we've seen. And it's also very slow moving astrologically, and so when it's linked with Taurus, of which also is relatively slow, it moves towards things cautiously and takes small deliberate measures towards its goal, you actually end up with something of which is extremely slow, Saturn and Taurus. It would actually lead to stagnation instead of growth, which is what we see on the card. There is a tree or some foliage on this card, and yet it doesn't seem to be going with its natural cycle. It's in a state of stagnation, so it's dying away, and yet it's not even fully turning to the skeletal branches of winter, which would return it back to life again in summer and spring, of course. Instead, it's just stuck there, and so it's like the seasons aren't changing for it, and it's not moving. This, of course, in our life is something of which is very negative. We feel like we can't move forward, or like we saw with the Rider-Waite card, we probably know how to move forward, but we can't summon the energy to do so. We're stuck in a state of laziness, essentially. And since these Disks cards are often used in material readings, business and things like that, it can be where you just can't summon the energy to actually grow the business. You know exactly what to do. It's not like you are stuck in terms of ideas. The idea could be sitting in front of you, but you just haven't picked it up. And this can be because of a fear. And there is a fear in this card. There is a suggestion of fear of the change of the season, of which of course would make this plant lose its leaves, and it would look as though it was dead, and yet we know that it will come back. There is just a fear to put the foot forward and make the change occur, because even though we know what's going to happen, we just feel that we're not ready for the emotions and things of which actually would come with that. You'll see that the actual discs themselves have around them the red and blue colours of which we saw on the previous card, connected with the rosy cross. And yet here the colours are deliberately faded, almost as if they too have grown old and began to die away. And they're surrounded, of course, in the relative drab brownness of the card, of which is the earth and yet can also be, again, the element of Taurus. And so this shows that lack of spark, that lack of burning desire to put that foot forward and go ahead with the change, like we've seen. This is because, of course, the red and the blue energy are a fertile symbol. They're masculine and feminine energy, and we saw them with the rosy cross coming together to implant a universal spirit upon a material object. We saw it with the image of the crucifix and Christ representing spirit superimposed over the top of there. Here, those colours have faded away, and so it's a bit like picking something up, watching a movie, for example, reading a book, and it's all very good, and yet somehow you just weren't emotionally involved in it, even though you feel like you would have been if your mind was just in a better place. You just weren't in the mood, so to speak. You just hadn't got that spark to allow yourself to become immersed and to learn lessons from it and so on. You would feel like the experience was passive and even superficial rather than actually engaging. Now these discs, of which have these symbols within them, which are, as we've seen, all Saturn and Taurus, are arranged into a particular figure. And this is a rather strange image. This is part of a series of images connected with divinatory geomancy. And so the throwing of rocks or even bones, symbols, into a series of patterns for a type of divination. Traditionally there were 16 patterns of which could be interpreted, and amongst them they are said to represent the different forms of manifested reality, and therefore can be used to generate meaning in the query of which has been put forth. Here on the 7 of discs, our discs are formed into one of these symbols, and it's the symbol of rubeus, of which is Latin for red. And yet this is actually one of the worst of these geomantic symbols. In fact, some suggest that if one was doing a reading and this symbol showed up first, then the reading itself would be abandoned and no longer carried on. The image is said to represent an upturned glass, and so, of course, success would be the glass filled up with the wine, the elixir of life. Abundance would be the glass literally spilling forth with this liquid, and failure is turning the glass upside down and allowing it to all pour out. And so this is a very unfavourable shape to find in your divination, and so the fact that the coins are actually in this shape does show that this is perhaps one of the darkest cards in this suit that you can draw. Rubeus, in terms of geomantic divination, could also represent something of the 4 elements here placed at the bottom, like what we see with the inverted pentagram, and the point of which is pointing down towards the physical world. And of course, when we connect this with the element of Saturn in the card, it's those things in the physical world that we don't want to see, of course, death and misery and all that type of thing. It's called red as well because it can mean that the wine in the glass, that elixir of life, has spilled down onto the ground. It's stained the ground, and it could have even stained us, metaphorically, which can mean that this could represent a type of anger, lashing out due to a temporary mishap, like tipping a glass over, so to speak. And so, of course, that can set off a snowball effect, and your anger could turn into violence, and then people could get hurt, and it goes on and on and on until you're in a quite deep level of darkness. And so that's why this is a bit of a warning, actually, in some regards, this card. It's not entirely without hope, of course. There is always some type of glimmer of hope in these things, and yet it's not a good card. It can mean a difficult period in your life, and specifically in terms of finances, and in terms of business and the gaining of things in life. And the sense of hope that one can get from it is to look at these symbols of Saturn, of which is actually, we often fear Saturn, and there is that fear in the card. We have to move beyond the fear of it and look at what it can teach us, and that is that it's about time. And so we have to step back and allow a period of time to pass. Yes, the glass has tipped over and the wine has spilled out, but instead of lashing out immediately, imagine if this could happen much slower, and you could understand the consequences of the actions. You could understand that there's always a way to turn the glass back up and pour out another glass. It's not the end of the world, even though it may feel so during its actual time. And of course the card suggests that we're not putting the effort in. We know how to put the effort in, but we can't actually be bothered, like we saw with the Rider-Waite card. And so we have to find something of the element of that Father of Time in Saturn, and in a positive spin on it, know that the spark will return. Something will show itself in our physical world, of which could come from the corner of our eye, or could come from a simple word that somebody says, or from anywhere. And we will begin to snap out of this state of sloth and understand that if we want to make things succeed again, we actually have to physically get up and turn the glass back over. It's not going to turn back over on its own. And so we step back, we analyse what it is that's causing us the fear or the anger or the lack of energy. We allow it to be, we allow it to pass, and then we will know how to move on from it.